सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen though.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Hello and welcome back to World 360. Before we get into the nitty-gritties, here's a little update. Regular viewers know this to be a bi-weekly show, but going forward, we're going to offer you a once-a-week action-packed episode in which we cover 3 geopolitical issues instead of just one. Now, these won't be the kind of issues you see on your daily news feed. For example, I'm sure you've seen a lot of headlines about China's 20th Communist Party Congress and Xi Jinping entering an unprecedented third term. But those aren't the kinds of stories we're going to focus on in this show. Instead, in this episode, we're going to talk about how Putin was told off by one of his allies in a public forum, and a former Prime Minister's recent memoir that revealed ways he convinced Donald Trump into backing his foreign policy. We're also going to try to answer some big questions like why Bangladesh is asking the IMF for a $4.5 billion loan when its economy isn't in as critical a condition as, say, Sri Lanka or Pakistan. We've seen how Russian President Vladimir Putin has been criticized by the West for his invasion into Ukraine, but of late, it seems even some of his allies have had some choice words for him. Emomali Rahmon, president of Central Asian country Tajikistan, had what some called an outburst at the Central Asia-Russia Summit or the CICA, which was held last Friday. He told President Putin, "We have always respected the interests of our main strategic partner," referring to Russia, and he added, "We want respect too." He said that Tajikistan and other small Central Asian countries have been treated like outsiders, just as they were during the Soviet Union. Now, this was clearly an unscripted rant during which Putin seemed visibly uncomfortable. Leaders from other Central Asian countries also silently watched as Rahmon spoke. Even a Russian official sitting behind Putin and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov seemed slightly amused. But perhaps the most important remark from Rahmon was that he felt his country and others in Central Asia were not receiving as much attention from Moscow as they would have liked. He said, "I ask you not to pursue a policy towards the Central Asian countries as if they are the former Soviet Union." Keep in mind that Rahmon is 68 years old and once served as the deputy of the Supreme Council of the Tajik Soviet Socialist Republic in 1990. And for him to hark back to the Soviet past holds even more weight. Now, Tajikistan is a close ally of Russia and regularly hosts Russian soldiers and military units. It also receives a lot of investment from Russia, but perhaps the reason we saw this impassioned speech by Rahmon and not any other Central Asian leader is because Tajikistan is by far the poorest country in the Central Asian region and most vulnerable to the impact of Western sanctions on Russia. Now, this is because it shares deeply intertwined economic, political, and security relations with Russia. Now, a report by a US federal body known as the US Institute of Peace points out that there is a huge number of Tajik labor migrants who work in Russia and who, because of this invasion into Ukraine, will face a 22% decline in their remittances. So it's very clear that Rahmon was acting on the frustration perhaps felt by his own people. Let's now move away from Central Asia a little further west to Israel. Former Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has just come out with a memoir called Bibi, My Story. We in India might remember Netanyahu as the man who famously stood alongside Prime Minister Modi in a beach picture. But in the eyes of Israelis and for many in the West, this man was seen for a very long time as politically invincible, despite facing several allegations of corruption. We're talking about a man who served 5 terms as Israeli PM and shaped much of Israel's foreign policy in the 21st century, including a hardline stance against Palestinians. He has also interacted with several American presidents from Obama and Trump over the years, and therefore his new tell-all book is sure to include a lot of interesting stories behind the curtain of geopolitics. Now, one of the biggest revelations from Netanyahu's memoir is that he and his officials used golf metaphors to convince Donald Trump to back Israel in Middle East peace talks and pull out of the Iran nuclear deal. For example, Netanyahu and his officials described to Trump that peace with the Emirates was like a 5-foot putt. Peace with the Saudis was like a 30-foot putt, and peace with the Palestinians as a hole-in-one through a brick wall. In the memoir, we also see Netanyahu for the first time admitting that he asked Barack Obama, the then American president, in 2013 to order a strike on Iran's nuclear installations. But it seems Obama wasn't for it. In fact, he told Netanyahu, "I don't want to be an 800-pound gorilla strutting on the world stage for too long. We acted that way." And finally, we're going to look at why Bangladesh is seeking a $4.5 billion loan from the IMF. Now, we've seen how Sri Lanka, which faced a grave political and security crisis, and Pakistan, whose economic decline has been worsened by devastating floods, went to the IMF's door. But why Bangladesh, whose economy is not as critical? Bangladesh first made a formal request to the IMF for the loan in July, but only heard back from the international body just last week. The IMF has told Bangladesh to implement far-reaching reform measures in the banking and revenue sectors and also to ramp up revenue collection in order to avail this loan. It was also in August that the IMF pointed out that the South Asian nation's economy was not in as bad a shape as its neighbors, but that the downward trend of its foreign exchange reserves, as well as high food and energy prices brought on by the Ukraine war, are causes for concern. But what's really hit the industrial sector in Bangladesh is the rise in fuel prices up to 52%. So clearly the country has been struggling. Now, as Rosie Shahjahan, a Dhaka-based researcher, puts it, Bangladesh is taking a preventative measure to benefit from loans from the IMF as well as the World Bank. Therefore, it's perhaps better to refrain from referring to Bangladesh's loan request to the IMF as a bailout, as we would maybe when we're talking about Sri Lanka or Pakistan. It is, however, surprising to see Bangladesh go to the IMF's door when the growth of its economy over the last few years, even when compared to India's, has been quite impressive. A recent report by the Associated Press noted how Bangladesh's miracle economy, which was built on the back of its garment manufacturing sector, could face similar troubles of its neighbors, like excessive spending on development projects, public frustration over corruption and cronyism, and more. Now, let's break down this $4.5 billion loan that Bangladesh is asking for. Of this $4.5 billion, Bangladesh is seeking $1.5 billion to help ease its balance of payments, another $1.5 billion for budget support, and another $1.5 billion from the IMF's newly created Resilience and Sustainability Trust Fund, which helps countries build resilience to external shocks and ensure sustainable growth. Now, this seems to be more than the $2.9 billion loan that the IMF has announced it will provide to Sri Lanka. Of course, that loan has already reached the level of an IMF staff agreement, while Bangladesh is only now beginning talks with the IMF. Unlike Pakistan and Sri Lanka, however, Bangladesh's inflation hasn't yet skyrocketed and its foreign reserves aren't yet depleted. There are only worrying trends about these two factors. And what's happening in Bangladesh may not be as critical as what we're seeing in Pakistan or Sri Lanka, but it is a part of a larger trend of strained foreign reserves held by emerging markets and developing economies that we've seen over the course of this year. In Bangladesh's case, if remittances and export earnings perform well going forward, it could avoid a crisis of large proportions. But perhaps a little help from the IMF could also tide over any future crisis brought on by, say, global factors. Therefore, Bangladesh's decision to go to the IMF could be seen more as a responsible move rather than a premature one. Before I end, I would encourage all our viewers to comment below or email me any suggestions you might have for topics going forward. You can also DM me on Twitter. So do tune in every Wednesday for a new action-packed episode where we'll discuss 3 geopolitical issues. And until then, thank you so much for watching. This is Pia Krishnankutty for ThePrint. Do subscribe to The Print and follow us on social media.